Today on Steve's Garage, I'm replacing the coolant overflow tank and some associated hoses on my P80 Volvo. As any P80 owner knows, there is a lot of variation in this chassis. This specific car is a 2000 V70 XC with the 2.4T, so this video will be best for the later 70 series cars and may not be as much help on the earlier 850s. As far as I can tell, the coolant tank is original, it was leaking, the return line is hard as a rock, and since I'm replacing the tank, I might as well replace the feed line that comes off the bottom of it. Before I get started on the work, I want to quickly cover the tools I'll be using. You could get this job done with a pick tool, Phillips and flathead screwdrivers, and a big old bottle of coolant. However, I did use some pinch-off pliers, and I'll be replacing my hose clamps with some nicer constant tension clamps today, so I'll be using the cable hose clamp pliers for those. The hose clamp sizes are 29, 26, and then two 16mm for the return line. It's certainly not a must, but I do like to replace the old rusty clamps with fresh ones when I can. I purchase all my clamps from Bellmetric. I don't have any affiliation with them, they just have a huge selection and I can always find what I'm looking for. I started off this job by emptying the expansion tank as much as I could. Maybe yours is already empty, or you'd rather clamp off the supply line, disconnect it, and pull it out that way. I was trying to do this as cleanly as possible, so I used a baster to suck out as much coolant as I could. You're not going to get it all out because there are some baffles and the level sensor in there, but I found this a lot easier than trying to handle a tank full of coolant. Next, we can pull the power steering fluid reservoir away from the coolant tank. Normally you'd have to use something like a flathead screwdriver to move the clip on the power steering fluid reservoir, but the piece on my expansion tank is actually broken, so it pulls right out. I didn't do it here, but you should move the power steering reservoir and hose up and out of the way as it'll give you more room to work. Now you can remove the coolant return hose from the tank itself. In my case, it was a fuel line style clamp that I could loosen with a screwdriver. Yours may look different. As you can see, the hose was really stiff, so it was really difficult to get off the tank. You could probably just cut it off, but in this case, it was a hose that I purchased from FCP, so I did want to keep it intact so I could warranty it out. Just a side note about these hoses, I'm not sure what's going on with the rubber version, but they're all junk. Even a brand new OEM hose gets hard and dry rotted after a couple months. I was tired of constantly replacing the rubber ones, which is why I'm here replacing it with a silicone hose, even though I don't typically use silicone coolant hoses on my cars. Now you can pull the coolant tank up and out of the way to access the plug for the level sensor. I found it easiest to use a pick tool to depress the little tab and get it disconnected. The other thing to disconnect on the bottom of the tank is the coolant supply hose. This is where having your power steering fluid reservoir out of the way really helps. I'll be clamping the hose off to try and minimize the mess, but I will ultimately be replacing that hose. Another trick to minimize the mess is to put the cap back on the expansion tank and make sure the outlet is tipped up when you remove the hose. As you can see, I got away pretty cleanly, all things considered. If you're not replacing any of the hoses, at this point I would use the chapters to skip ahead to installing the new tank. If you are replacing the hoses, keep watching as that's what I'm about to cover. Remember that the coolant tank is the highest point of the system, which is really helpful, but I still wanted to try and get as much of the coolant out of the hoses as I could. Using a quart cup and squeezing the upper rad hose, I was able to force out a little bit of coolant from the remaining hoses before removing them. Now back to that supply hose. Right behind the timing belt cover and sort of in between the engine and firewall is where it connects to the hard pipe. It's actually pretty easy to get at, and in my case it was a screw hose clamp that I could easily undo with a flathead screwdriver. Moving to the overflow hose, it's time to undo the end from the radiator. The provision for this hose on the rad is really fragile, so use some caution when removing the hose. If it breaks, you're going to take a chance repairing it, or more than likely replacing your whole radiator. I'll be starting reinstallation with the supply hose since that needs to be in place before installing the expansion tank. It's as simple as sliding the new hose onto the hardline and installing your hose clamp. Again, I'm using the constant tension clamps today. If you're looking to do the same, this will be the 26mm clamp, the larger 29 will go on the tank side. Before we install the new tank, we have to install or swap over a new level sensor. Normally I would say buy a new one because you have it out, but I had replaced this when I bought the car, so mine isn't actually that old. Use a flathead screwdriver to pop it out of the old reservoir, and it should press into the new one with a solid click. Moving back over to the car, you can start by connecting the supply hose to the bottom of the tank. It should easily slide on, and don't forget your hose clamp. If you are using a constant tension clamp, this one will be the 29mm size. Don't forget to plug in your level sensor, and once everything's connected, you can slide the tank back into place against the strut tower. You can also get your power steering fluid reservoir and hose back into their correct location. There's really no mystery with the overflow hose. Because of its shape, it can only be installed one way, so connect one end to the radiator, the other end to the expansion tank, and you're good to go. The two 16mm tension clamps worked great on this hose. I never had any leaks. Fitment of the hose was also perfect, and the silicone lasted way longer than whatever's going on with the rubber hoses. With all the new parts installed, it's time to add coolant and bleed the system. I'm going to share my procedure for doing this. There are plenty of different methods on how to do it, but this has always worked for me. Feel free to follow along or just skip to the end. I start by filling the expansion tank, and don't worry about capping it off. I'm putting it on here today because I have to pull the car out of the garage and I want to avoid a mess. So with the expansion tank full and the cap off, start up your car and let it idle up to temp. Coolant will start flowing, the level may change a little bit, but let it do its thing. Keep an eye on the interior temp gauge, but also the tank itself to check for any large drops in the level of coolant. You can also feel the upper radiator hose to check if there's coolant flowing. That's an indication of the thermostat opening once the car is up to temp. You can also check and see if there's coolant flowing out of the return line from the radiator. Once the system is flowing and you've confirmed there are no leaks, top off your expansion tank, put the cap on, and take the car for a spin. Once you come back, you can double check for any leaks and confirm the coolant level in the tank. If you need to add any coolant, do not open the tank while the car is hot and under pressure. Wait for it to cool, and then top off the system. Once it's cool and you top it off, you should be all set. You've heat cycled the system, so you'd know if there were any leaks, and the level should be accurate. If you do want to keep an eye on it for the next couple drives, you can, but there shouldn't be a situation where the coolant is dangerously low. And that concludes this little cooling system refresh. Please don't hesitate to ask any questions. I try to help everyone out as best I can. And if you're interested in other P80 Volvo content, I've got an entire playlist for you to check out. Thanks for watching, everyone.